Welcome to Second Take, the show that focuses on the issues behind the news. West Africa is emerging as the next significant iron ore province after Australia's rich Pilbara, attracting the attention of global majors and the Chinese. Mining Weekly editor Martin Creamer tells us more. Welcome, Martin.
Thanks, Shannon.
Now, why are major diversified miners interested in this West African region?
It wasn't long ago where that headline screamed out from The Economist saying, Africa, the hopeless continent. I think these days they need to change that headline and say Africa, the hopeful continent. You know, when your diaspora are keen on coming back to your continent, then you know that things are changing. And we know that in Shannon at the moment there is this conference going on where people from all over the world who regard themselves as Africans are meeting. And not only diaspora, but the whole of the investment world is looking at Africa and saying, you know, maybe things are going to be good in this continent, we should start investing. Those willing to risk more are already in. And we see in West Africa, you know, the big names are there. You know, Rio Tinto has got the Samandu province, and that's a big iron ore project that they're looking at. We see that, you know, Xstrata is in Mauritania, all over that region, Guinea, and Cameroon, and all the other West African states of Liberia. They're attracting investors, particularly mining investors, and people are starting to regard that part of West Africa as the future Pilbara. This is a message for Australia because we've also looked at East Africa, Mozambique, and people are calling that the future Bowen Basin. Well, if you look at what Bowen Basin has done to the riches of Queensland in Australia, you'll think, well, perhaps there's great potential here for Africans if they can get their act together, their political act together. Perhaps Southern Africa could become a future Bowen Basin. So these are both products linked to steel. And we know that the outlook for steel is still strong, despite the hiccups that China is experiencing. Those hiccups are causing a lot of the project plans that were going to go ahead, even in Australia, where it's supposed to be low risk. Suddenly you see marking time. You know, BHP Billiton indicating last week they're not going to go ahead with this $88 billion plan that they had. That was the overall investment. They're going to start counting their pennies. And so that sort of marking time gives another opportunity to Africa, because the analysts are working out that all those projects that they were going to go ahead with in Australia, even in a risk-free Australia, are far more expensive than what you can get in Africa as a buy. So it's build versus buy. We suddenly see this hesitancy from the big majors, BHP Billiton, to build. They want to hold on to their cash. They want to go ahead with their own projects. Whereas in the past, I mean, every CEO you'd speak to from BHP Billiton and Anglo American, they'd always tell you about, we're going to build our own projects. We're not going to buy. It's too expensive to buy. Suddenly, we see the analysts saying, no, it's better to buy, particularly in Africa, where then not only the big majors have been active, but the small juniors have been ferreting around there, and they've got a lot of value in some of those assets. So I wouldn't be surprised if you know, there's going to be a lot of activity in the M&A field, the merger and acquisition around West Africa. So if you end up with a West African Pilbara and you end up with an East African Bowen Basin, it's not bad, because we realize the wealth that created for Australia. Australia, to my mind, didn't play the cards right with China. You know, when China wanted to invest there 3 years ago, they gave them the cold shoulder. There was the previous Prime Minister who was even Chinese speaking. He was trying to encourage these investments from the Chinese. And of course, he was thrown out for other reasons. He wanted to increase the tax there. But one gets the feeling that perhaps the Chinese will feel more at home in Africa. They seem to want to build a lot of infrastructure and help the continent, but they've got that aim. You know, half of the iron ore and the coking coal that comes out of East Africa is also steel linked. So in the iron ore field, half of the iron ore they want to be importing from their own interests in operations. And that could help Africa.
And they spoke about 50% of their own, so they want to own at least half.
They want to own at least half. So they're coming in as owners. They had that opportunity to come in as large owners in Australia, but they got the cold shoulder there. They're not getting the same cold shoulder in Africa. So if you own half of the investment, obviously you're going to have an offtake agreement. And that could be a big blow, when you look long, 2025. I mean, you've got to look long in mining for Australia and a plus for Africa.
Now, several iron ore transactions have been concluded in West Africa since January 2010. Can you tell us about some of them?
They just keep coming there. From January 2010, you see Western investment plus Chinese investment, big names involved, both from a point of view of majors in the iron ore field, and also, state-owned enterprises from China. And even the last one, I think, in 2012 was between BHP Billiton and Gabon. That seems to be more of an exploratory type exploration agreement. But again, these big majors are making sure they don't lose out. Rio Tinto has been very active in Guinea. It's got a lot of infrastructure to build. And it did have a few difficulties there, political difficulties, and to overcome that risk, it brought in a Chinese partner, a major Chinese partner. And I think a lot of these Western companies feel as though if they bring in China, they're bringing in the country China. And there's an easier government-to-government talk between, the African governments and the Chinese governments. Chinese governments also ready to put in infrastructure. And some of the infrastructure hurdles are huge. And you need a lot of money. And just if you look at the table, there's just a regular pattern of big names investing in West Africa.
Now, what does West African Minerals, the company that we've been speaking about, focus on in these areas, and when do they hope to begin operating?
Yeah, so West African Minerals on the London AIM, a junior coming into the space, already excited about the quality of the iron ore that they're looking at, and they're looking for direct shipping ore, which means you can export this iron ore and also high grade type of iron ore. Cameroon they're very happy with. They're close to the ports. This latest aeromagnetic survey they've done is giving them a lot of encouragement. They feel as though this could be something they could start with, and it needn't have the elaborate infrastructure to start with, say port infrastructure. They're quite innovative. Not only can they get to the port quickly, they've got innovative plans, but they can also export from less capital intensive infrastructure. So interesting situation there. Cameroon seems to have changed its mining policies. It's wanting to encourage people to come and invest. There is sometimes a free carry. You've got to give the government 10%, etc. But all the risk managers are saying that they feel that the risk has been lowered in Cameroon and a lot of the other West African countries, because the new mining policies are still fresh, and it's unlikely that they will change them in the near term.
Well, thank you very much for chatting to us, Martin.
It's a great pleasure, Shannon.
That's the show for today. Join us again next time for more news and insight into what's happening in the mining world.